Okay, very interesting. So I'm looking at the time. We actually reserved a lot of space and time for the audience, so it's a good time to turn it over to your questions. I just want to first thank all the panelists. It's not over, but for these very interesting commentaries and just I think we had a good instinct in bringing people with different backgrounds together. The question is not very clear that we asked, but I think we learned a lot in kicking it around. I would also like to do a special thank you to Alex Trebek, who gave, I think, a very inspiring talk, a very impressive person, and I also think he provided insights that are worth remembering. So with this, I would like to open it to the floor. We have a microphone in the middle. Is that the only one we have? If you don't mind. Otherwise, you know what, I'm also very mobile. I'm happy to walk around. So the topic is enormous. It's not the big truth with the T, the large T, but anything in this sphere, and questions, please, would be very welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say thanks to all the panelists. It was a really interesting panel. My name is Kimberly Gerling. I work for Evidence for Democracy. So we work a lot on misinformation and trying to sort of equip our community to fight misinformation, by their own skills and preventing the sharing of misinformation, but also having more conversations about misinformation. But one of the things that I find challenging is, and on this question of truth, a lot of people feel very, emotional about topics where there's a lot of confusion, and that can be really challenging to change somebody's mind. So, I mean, Nancy, you sort of spoke to this with climate change, but maybe can you guys speak to what your tips are for having conversations with people who are very firm on their beliefs that might not be true? Because I find this one of the things that I don't know what to do sometimes is how to have more effective conversations about truth when people are very emotional.
Thank you, Kimberly. Go ahead.
I think, when we see people being very, very emotional about things, we have to honor that, because what that's coming from is their fundamental value. We can't get upset about things that we don't care about. And if we care, then that's an opening. And that's an opening to engage that person in a meaningful way. And I think there's some, thought leaders right now who are really trying very hard to help us bridge the gap between the us and the them, on whatever topic that might be. But I think having a fundamental human empathy for that person and where they find themselves, and finding ways to validate in some small way who they are, what their story is, and why they're so passionate about that. And then you try to find out, well, is there a Venn diagram here in terms of our value systems? And then finding ways to sort of build on that to crawl or inch towards, some understanding.
And yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Well, I would echo everything that you just said, and just note that it takes time, and to be able to really get to the core of the issues and see where those intersection points are. It just absolutely takes time and determination, and we'll get there.
Yeah, if you are on a one-to-one conversation, of course it's tough. But the two tricks that are, one of them is try to, exactly what you just said, try to find a consensus, something that you agree on. And the second one, try to narrow the question. But these are for a one-to-one conversation. If you are writing on a blog, for example, and you are trying to reach a general audience, don't ever forget that there is not only people on one side and people on the other side. There is a lot of spectrum in between. And this is frequently those one that we want to reach. If you are talking about climate change, unfortunately, don't try to convince les irréductibles, the radical climate skeptics, but there is a lot of people in between that you can reach with the good arguments.
Yeah, in continuity with what you said, it's to listen even more deeply to what are the human needs behind that in people's heart. What is really in the context of their life also. It's listening more to the whole story, and help to understand why it's so important for them, or they are so emotional, what is sacred for them, what is the need they try to secure or to comfort, and then it can help to reduce the tension and to see more clearly in what really they mean. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, Blaine Kennedy. I retired from Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I'd like to bring to your attention, it applies to all of you. One of the things that I think comes right out of straight and crooked thinking, but something that we saw a number of times is that people, when they want to try to prove their point, they'll say, a researcher or a prof from a university, they've got a PhD, and that immediately shuts up 90% of the people. They don't question it because they think that these are great authorities. PhD in the wrong subject, mind you, but anyway, they've got that. And then if that doesn't work, they'll then say they have a model, so then they've done a lot of work. And where I was, we encountered several times that people did this, and it only takes, the only ones that challenge the model are people that actually built models in the past or know the subject matter. And you in government and academics, and a lot of times I just think that you could respond on this, but I would like to know how you cope with this, because I've gone into a couple of things where they had complicated models. And we went down, and all of the facts in those models were actually correct. They were just the inappropriate sources of data. They were the wrong subject matter. And a lot of these people would get away with things because it's this call to a higher authority. We've gone to the expert, a PhD in, well, they don't tell you what it's in, but it's appropriate to ask this at the university because there's a lot of academics here. But I know in government departments, you can't jump up and answer to everything. But how do you cope with this thing where they're trying to make themselves look a lot bigger than they are with some false information?
So I can tell a story now on this one. So I started in my position just over a year ago, October 2018. Within 2 months, I found myself in a position of someone saying, one thing, this is the reality in my organization, and then my right hand was saying exactly the opposite. On the same issue. So I would go back to one of the points that Alex Trebek was raising. Fundamental to our culture of scientific integrity is debate. So we have that built in to our scientific advice, making sure that we have that debate. And if we do not have that expertise within the organization, we ensure that we're building those relationships externally to make sure we do have that healthy debate, to make sure we do have the integrity of the advice. But yes, absolutely, and experienced it within 2 months on the job, yes.
I like to say that the world will not be such a mess if the university were not part of the problems. And it's true that, including with universities, it's very important to have this critical perspective on authority and especially on manpower inside of the university, because there's all kind of level of silencing. And my question is always, how do I use this power or this authority? Is it to listen more carefully and give more opportunity to people to speak and more truth to be expressed and to be listened to, or to reproduce some truth that will serve my own interests or the other interests and people's interests? So it's a lot about the vision behind it and how do we use power. But it's definitely a power, and it's also a problem. But studying more deeply inside of the institution how some truth are repressed or form of ignorance are reproduced, it's also very interesting and very rich. It can tell us about the institution too, and the society.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make a very quick comment myself. Something I noticed is that a lot of experts are much more shy than one would think. And because not everyone is willing to speak up on their expertise, those who are willing get an overproportional exposure, and they are always the ones called. And so that also puts a burden on the journalists to, I know there's always time pressure, but to seek out not just the one who is available, but the one who maybe has a new take on things. could we please have you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel discussion so far. My name's Peter McKinnon. I'm involved in the university and also in the private sector, so 50-50 kind of hat. Mark began with a very interesting question, and I think we agreed, because nobody yelled no, that the university is a very central part of answering the questions and promoting facts and truth and so forth. I was speculating as to the fact that we've gone over the last number of decades in an academic sense, collaboration and cooperation at small levels, like within faculties, across faculties, and sometimes, of course, colleagues work with others in universities, and other universities, and even in the private sector. So we've gone through interdisciplinary, then multidisciplinary, and now transdisciplinary studies, if you like. So some of this has sort of come up. You mentioned multidisciplinary. My question, and posit, I suppose, is what if the university were to take the big challenges, like climate change, like perhaps artificial intelligence impact on society, these sorts of things, and turn it into a university-wide initiative beyond the scale of ISSP, which of course is a multi-faculty effort, but it's small compared to the whole campus. What are your thoughts about trying to make universities national centers of excellence in transdisciplinary study of whatever topic they choose? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to look at you.
I think I can't not, attempt a response. I mean, I think you've made an obvious point that I think it's a well-known and it's a well-cited, fact that the wicked problems of our times, need every disciplinary perspective, and so. I see no problem with deciding, that we as an institution are going to, become the world differentiated expert on X. There's some internal political challenges in deciding what that topic is going to be. I certainly wouldn't be standing in the way of us wanting to take that position. But I also think the other thing that we have to remember in all of this, and I'm sure that my fellow panelists and the people in the room would agree that we also need to not forget deep disciplinary knowledge, that we can't start running after a multi and transdisciplinary perspective before we've had a solid understanding or a deeper dive into one disciplinary context, because that helps us, to understand that we do have frameworks, and then when you start to talk with your colleagues in other disciplines, actually they too have different contexts. So I don't know if I responded fully to your question, but it's a partial response.
And why not see outside of university walls? I mean, transdisciplinary is good, but universities have allies, friends outside of the walls of university. As a science journalist, I am frequently shocked when I'm hearing a university teacher criticizing all media and all journalists into the same block. You have allies, you have friends, you have people who that sharing the same goals in this information ecosystem, and this fight against disinformation cannot be won only with university teachers. I mean, you don't have a lot of time on your hands. We were saying at the beginning that there are not a huge number of science journalists in the media. Well, all media are receptive to pressure, and try to imagine what would happen if all the universities in Canada were saying to themselves, okay, starting from now, each time we are buying an ad in our local newspaper, we will try to ask the newspaper to create that we want this ad in a science page. At first, the newspaper will say, well, sorry, we don't have a science page. After 2, 3, 4 times, they will realize, oops, something is going on here. And if your newspaper is opening a weekly science page, well, you have to hire a science journalist. So this is by things like that you can reach outside of the walls of the university and realize that, yes, this is a fight that will encompass a lot of people, not only the people in this room.
Thank you. Yeah, I would actually like to ask Nancy on this topic as well, because one way to create a market would be for government to mandate it. And there's a precedent, for example, during the war in the United States, back to Abraham Lincoln, the president said, I need these academics to do something. I need them to step up. And I don't think we hear very often governments at all levels, including municipalities, to say those academics should actually do something. We need you to do that. We need to do it fast, and etc. Is that realistic? Can we expect this to happen?
Politician to answer that question? Sure, non-politician, just being clear. Actually, we have started to go there. So in June 2019, so outside of the climate change example, we released Canada's Plastic Science Agenda. So this outlines where, from a policy perspective, there are very real research needs that need to be addressed in order to be able to inform government decision-making from across all disciplines, covering the full life cycle of plastics, from the design, the monomer that we consider, through to how we manage the waste and public education decisions that are made. So we started to do that with plastics, and we are in the process now of looking at a climate change research plan for the country. And so that dialogue is happening. We're engaging. We engage with partners in academia, Indigenous peoples, industry, looking at shaping that agenda, that roadmap for research for Canada. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for waiting so patiently. Please.
My name is Stephanie Haustein. I'm an assistant professor here at the School of Information Studies. I'm actually here with about 20 students of mine that are interested in information literacy. My question is actually to all of you. So Jill already mentioned open data sharing and data management, but I was wondering what all of you think about open science or open scholarship, and if it's necessary to answer those questions. I know that Environment Climate Change Canada has a specific group on that. I imagine that, Pascal, you need open access to publications to be able to read them. But I was also wondering, especially from an Indigenous perspective, if open science practices like data sharing, transparency, and open access publication might even be harmful from a perspective that we haven't thought about. So I was basically wondering what your perspectives are on that. Thank you.
We have a small yet mighty team on open science, so we are absolutely supportive of efforts to ensure that we do have open science. That's in particular from an environment and climate change perspective. Other departments have some challenges from, for example, a security perspective. So getting the right balance, again, between security considerations and the need to make sure that we're tapping into the best available science.
Thank you. Maybe, do you have...
You want me to speak again? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Let's take... I don't want to stop you. Otherwise, let's take the next question. Kevin, please.
Hi, my name is Kevin Orr. I'm a professor here in the fine arts world, so my sense of science is huge. My question is this, and I wonder your reflections. What do you think the relationship is between truth, time, and action? And what I mean by that is truth is a very slippery ground. With time, our understanding and our knowledge is increasing, so what's true today is not true tomorrow. So what action do we take? And how do we decide, with two slippery feet, how to walk forward?
That would be a great book title, Truth, Time and Action.
I can jump very quickly on that. As a journalist, I don't like the word truth. I use it as not very often, except in a metaphoric sense, like we must learn to distinguish the truth from false. But I much prefer the word knowledge and the word fact. One thing that we've learned in the 3 years of the Détecteur de Rumeurs is how worst it is that we think the difficulties that people have to distinguish fact from opinion. And so if we can learn, if we can educate people to recognize in a text what is a fact and what is an opinion, we will have progress enormously. And I leave the word truth for theologian.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think it would be a good time now to invite Ted Shu to provide some concluding remarks.